What's up, family? How y'all doing this glorious Saturday morning? Good morning on the West Coast. Good afternoon in the Central. Good afternoon on the East Coast. You know who it is. Angela Nirvana, your hostess with the mostest on the Friends of ADOS TV channel, bringing you those ADOS hot topics, making the case for reparations. And today, I am honored to have Marlon Aldridge as a guest to the show, as a friend to the show, as a friend of ADOS. He is the CEO of the Friends of ADOS PAC. We're bringing you a new series called Real Clear ADOS Politics. Yes, family. We're moving away from disparity politics. It's time to understand, family, that none of this gets done as long as we remain on the menu, right? And bemoaning what's happening to ADOS, crying in our beer, and still being in the same place, it's not an option for me or mine. It's not an option for you. It's not an option for yours, as far as I'm concerned. That's got to stop. We've got to understand politics from the inside. We have to understand, until we are at that table, until we aggregate dollars to put a Congress in place that's going to be full-chested about our reparations and Black agenda, we will continue to be on that menu. We will continue to be overlooked. That means all the other groups that we gnash and well about, DACA, LGBTQ, all of them, we'll continue to see them come up while we get left behind. So if that doesn't work for you, you really have to understand how politics works from the inside out, beyond the disparity politics, right? And that's what we here as the Friends of ADOS PAC is here to establish with you. We need to help you understand why we can no longer afford to sit on the sidelines, right? We've got more murders since George Floyd by the race soldiers. Rayshard Brooks, rest in peace. Yeah, killing us with impunity. None of this can change until we get the right people in office at the local, state, and national levels. We've got to get beyond our emotions, present company included. I get real emotional. Yes, I do. Because I'm a mother and I'm a woman designed by God. So of course I get emotional. But it's time for us to move beyond emotion. Understand the numbers. Understand how a bill becomes law. Understand who we currently have in office. What we need to do in order to get their influence at these discussions at the table, in order to get them working for us. There's a lot involved here, family, and we've got to be in that fight. And we've got to do it from a sound mind and a sound body, because there's much work to be done. The murders are continuing. The hangings are continuing. Out here in California, the very liberal California, we had 2 hanging deaths within 10 days. Brothers, they're coming after you. Why? Because you are the pillar of the Black community. You are the backbone of the Black community. Without you, it renders Black women to have to go to the gun ranges and to have to train for war, to protect our children, to protect our homes. That's the role of our men that they're taking out, to strengthen our communities. And why are a specific group of Black men being targeted? The race soldiers are in the communities where they've stripped it of education. They've stripped it of jobs. They've stripped it of lending to Black people to own businesses. It is institutionalized systemic racism. And we've got to break the back of that. But there's a how-to way to do it. And Mr. Marlon Aldridge is here to lend his political acumen to the discussion and to help us to understand how we can leverage the Friends of ADOS PAC and aggregate our money to be at the table instead of on the menu. Thank you for joining the live, America Regan. I appreciate you being on the live. Katina Maria Knight, thank you. Hattiesburg, Mississippi in the building. America Regan, Rita Forte, I love you, sis. That's ADOS Bay Area. Let's see who else do we have in the live. Let's see here. We've got Kenneth Walden. Thank you for joining the live. Asar Mustafa, Nancy Ortiz. That's my family. New York in the building. Beverly Facey, Lawrence Brody, Pamela McLean, Wayne White. Oh my goodness. Let's see here. Tanisha Dorsey, Bertie Diaz, Tim Beatty. I think that's my brother out of Dayton, Ohio. Kenneth Walden, Asar Mustafa. You guys, listen. If it continues to act up on the watch party, just come on over to the Friends of ADOS TV. I see it buffering over there for some odd reason, but you can see us clearly here at the Friends of ADOS TV. I'm Imani Zaire. I thank you for joining the live. So like I said prior, if you're having challenges with buffering at the watch party, come directly to the Friends of ADOS TV. And so I'm going to leave that for now. I don't know if there's a challenge with me running that live at the Say Chicago ADOS in the house. I love him, Michael Watts. Thank you. Yeah, please let me know where you're repping from when you come into the live. I so appreciate you, family. You know I love y'all black and strong. I appreciate you rolling with the sister since October last year. I appreciate you, your patience while I wear all the hats as producer, director, creator, lead journalist. I'm not really a journalist. I just have a lot of opinions about things, and I have a lot of love and passion for American descendants of chattel slavery. I am all about a gate around us, and I am grateful to each and every one of you, as I am our allies, which we have many. We have many allies that come on to here. As a matter of fact, I've got one of my allies who's going to co-host a show with me so we can talk about the love we have between each other and the understanding that we have about reparations in this country being exclusively for American descendants of chattel slavery, as it should be. Okay, family. Thank you, Jalib Arts, for joining the live. I appreciate you all. If you're having trouble on the watch party, I will be running that watch party later. It looks like it's buffering. So without further ado, I want to bring up Marlon Aldridge, CEO of the Friends of ADOS PAC. Stand by, family. Good afternoon, Marlon. How are you?
Good afternoon. Doing fine. I hope you're doing well also.
Thank you. I'm blessed and unstoppable. Say hello to our audience. They're filing on in as we, introduce the show.
Good evening, audience. The ADOS family. Good evening.
Absolutely. For those of you who may be new to the ADOS movement, know that we are not just a movement. We are a lineage. And the movement was designed out of that lineage. We are all family. Okay. So without further ado, I want to jump right in. Today's show is what has the CBC, Congressional Black Caucus, done for American descendants of slavery lately? I know many of you, and I've had some sentiments around this as well, believe that the CBC has changed course by aligning with other groups and neglecting the needs of the ADOS. And Marlon has been teaching me political education for about a year now. Between Yvette and him, I've been learning a lot. I learned that I love Yvette's show, but I learned that oftentimes it's dealing in disparity politics without a real agenda of what to do. And I have been asking for years what to do, what to do, what to do. She says that we are the solution. So Marlon and I started the Friends of ADOS PAC a year ago in June. We came to conference and had recruited quite a few people to do this work with us. And, Yvette doesn't believe that the movement is ready. And I say we're long overdue. We're at zero wealth, of which COVID has contributed to that on a real fast track, as 40 million people are laid off throughout the country, most of whom are the ADOS, even though we are only 13% of the population. When white folks catch a cold, Black folks of late are catching COVID. So we are over time. We are past time. We are late to the party. All the other groups have PACs, all of them. And so it makes no sense if we can donate to these YouTube celebrities like Yvette, like Tone. We can pay to fly to their conferences, stay in fancy hotels, buy fancy meals. What else can we do? We can get our hair done. We can get our nails done. We can go to the barber. We can eat out and have fancy schmancy parties for each other. I don't like this idea that we don't have money to do a PAC. We don't have a choice to do anything but the PAC, because Democratic down ballot strategy still doesn't give us the reparations and Black agenda that we're seeking. I don't hear anybody talking about that as we're marching into November. So I want to know about solutions. And that's why Marlon and we join forces to bring real solutions. And the only way we get reparations and a Black agenda in exchange for our vote is to get the interest and appeal of the people who are currently in office and bring in new elected officials to champion our cause. And if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. It takes money in politics to be at that table. And so we've created this new series, Real Clear ADOS Politics, to show you guys how this works, because I really believe that's what's missing in a lot of the discussions in the YouTube space. How do we achieve the legislation, the reparations, the Black agenda, and the enforcements? How does that work? And that's what Marlon is very skilled at, and he's here to share with us today. So today we're talking about the CBC, and I want Marlon to please, if you could, start with the function of the CBC, Congressional Black Caucus.
Well, the Congressional Black Caucus, the CBC, as you have stated, was founded in 1971. Okay, and they represent about 82 million Americans, 17 million which are African American. So that's about 41% of the African American community. So based on those numbers, our representatives do not only represent African Americans. So that's the first thing to understand, is that they have other constituencies, okay? And the majority...
I'm sorry, can you share those numbers again? Because I thought there were 36 million Blacks in this country. You said 17 million?
Well, we have to understand is that, let me start with the numbers again so we'll understand this. Well, let me say this first. There are currently 55 Black representatives in Congress. A couple of them are delegates, which mean that they don't vote. Okay, there's a delegate from the Virgin Islands, and there's also a delegate from the District of Columbia. So they're not voting members, although they have a voice. Okay, the second thing to understand is that for the voting members, those voting members represent only 26 states. Of course, we know that there are 50 states, so it's no way that those members could represent all African Americans, okay, because they only represent 26 states, okay? They represent 17 million African Americans. We know that there's somewhere on the order of 46 million African Americans, okay? So many of us will complain that they aren't adequately representing us and that they represent other interests, including white folks and minority populations. So it's very important for us to understand that they are elected to represent their constituencies. They are not solely elected to represent African Americans. Many of them have been able to win a seat in Congress, being supported by only 30% of the congressional districts of which they live. I'm talking about 30% African American districts. So Black elected officials have been able to win in congressional districts that are not majority Black. So we need to understand that first. So it's not just Black folks that they represent. We have to understand that. Only 41% of the African American population is represented. Now, those 55 or so members represent about 12% of the House of Representatives. Okay, so that's on about the order of our percentage in the population, somewhere around 13.6%. And of course, we're at an all-time high. That 55 represents an all-time high. We've never had that many members represented in Congress. And I think in the 60s or so, we probably had about 6 or so members. And then, of course, after the civil rights legislation during that time, we began to see many Black mayors, and Black people began to be represented in the state or become state legislators and other types of positions, sheriffs and county commissioners and trustees and things of that nature. So we have had gains politically. Of course, with the political gains, there must come economic gains, and there's the piece that we have yet to fulfill. But those two go hand in hand. Politics and economics goes hand in hand. Very important for us to be actively involved politically. At least in my opinion, what we need to do now is to develop strategies and mechanisms which allow us to pair up our economics with our politics. Now, of course, reparations goes a long way in helping to do that. Having programs in place sponsored by the government are also important. So we have to understand that. Most of those legislators are Democrats. As a matter of fact, out of those 55, only 2 of them are Republican. One in the House of Representatives, which is here, Will Hurd, out of Texas, and then of course Tim Scott out of South Carolina. Will Hurd, from what I am told, is going to be retiring at the end of the year. So we will have one Black Republican who is not a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, by the way, because the platform for the Republican Party, of course, does not line up with the platform for the Democratic Party. So from that standpoint, Tim Scott didn't see a benefit in being a part of the Congressional Black Caucus, even though it was conceived as a bipartisan organization. Okay, so those representatives represent the interests, of course, of their constituencies, and of course, they also represent the interest, our interest, in terms of making sure that equality, equity, and the American dream are also available to their constituents, which include African Americans and other minority communities.
Thank you for that explanation. I wanted to ask about how their bills become law. Could you walk us through the process of how that happens? Like, could you use reparations as an example of how that happens, starting with getting the majority of the CBC to even sign on for the HR 40? Like right now, not all of the members of the CBC are in support of even a study. Could you share how that would work, from the fact that you mentioned how we need the support of their constituents for them to be in support of a study, for them to be in support of reparations, that it's not just them making the decision. They're making a decision on behalf of their constituents, and how we have to appeal to them before we can even get everybody on board with the HR 40. Can you talk about that process?
That is correct. We live in a constitutional republic, which means that we elect our representatives to represent our interests. So that's important. And a legislator that does not represent the interest of his or her constituents, you can be assured that they will not be reelected. So that's first and foremost. In terms of how a bill becomes a law, any congressperson can introduce a law, or should I say what's called a bill. Okay. They put it in the hopper, the clerk takes it out, and of course gives it to the party leadership. The party leadership assigns it to a committee. The committee goes through their processes, bringing in the public, allowing the public to come in and to comment. They draft that legislation after, of course, doing all due diligence, research, and things of that nature. And then, of course, it's put on the agenda to be voted upon. And of course, if it receives 51%, but that same bill then has to pass the Senate. Okay, the Senate can decide to offer its own version of a bill. So you could have the same type of bill be introduced in both the Senate and the House. And the reparations study is in both the Senate, has been introduced in the Senate and in the House, but neither one has made it out of committee. And what your audience may or may not know is that HR 40 has been around since, I believe, 1998, introduced by a gentleman by the name of John Conyers. And Sheila Jackson Lee actually took that over from him before he left Congress. I think he's now, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's now deceased. But that bill has never made it to the floor for a vote because it does not have a lot of support. Okay, so in terms of reparations, there's been some studies being done in the public, and I think the support for a reparations bill is, I'm sure, up under 30%. I want to say about 19%, but don't quote me on the numbers. I know it's not more than 30%, so it's not publicly supported. Okay, and when we think back to the fact that we have representative government, or we have a republic, if the public does not support a particular bill, then those representatives will not make it an issue. And you said something about, if we look at the current version I know that it has the last time I checked, it has about 138 sponsors. Okay, when John Conyers had it, it never even came close to having that many supporters. Sheila Jackson Lee introduced it last year, I think in February. Senator Cory Booker introduced a version in the Senate, and I think that was in June or July of last year as well. Neither one, like I said, has made it out of committee. Neither one has made it to the floor of the House or the Senate for a floor vote. Okay, and what most people don't know is that most bills never become law. Okay, so let's reiterate. Any politician can introduce a bill. That does not mean that it will be assigned to committee. That does not mean that it will make it out of committee. And even when it goes through all of the processes and all of the procedural maneuvers that anyone in Congress can apply, it doesn't mean that it will even come to the floor for a vote. And when it does, it may not get that majority vote. And so we'll see these bills being introduced year after year. And H.R. 40 is one example of a bill that has been introduced year after year, but has never made it to the floor for a vote.
And now,
I guess I didn't finish the process, though. Let's say that a bill does make it to the floor for a vote. The House votes on it. I'll give you an example. The Raise the Wage Act, which is a federal minimum wage, which was introduced by Bobby Scott, who was a CBC member. That vote actually passed the House. When it passes the House, it goes to the Senate. The Senate can decide to offer its own version, or if they do not like what is in the current version, it can go to committee, what's called a conference committee, where then both parties can introduce amendments and maneuver with other types of procedural rules, which are set by the majority party. Okay, that's what many of us need to understand, is that there is a lot to happenings in either chamber. The party that is the majority sets the rules, and they normally follow what are called, or something similar to, if not directly, they follow what are called Robert's Rules of Orders. And there are many procedures in there that a politician can use to halt or to bring legislation to a halt. So it's important for us to understand that for the Congressional Black Caucus, they have an advantage in the House of Representatives because they are the majority, so they set the rules. But in the Senate, they are not the majority, so they do not set the rules. Okay, there are over 300 bills that the House has passed that will never see the light of day in the Senate because a gentleman by the name of Mitch McConnell controls the agenda. Okay, so they're just there. And he has vowed, as he did when Obama was in office, that anything that Obama favored in terms of legislation, it would never see the light of day. He went on Fox News and said this, and then he turned around and laughed about it. Okay, so this is what our CBC members are up against. They are up against an entrenched, at least in my opinion, right-wing conservative element, a racist, homophobic, women-hating organization in the Republican Party. So that's what we're up against. Now, once it passes, the identical version passes both the House and the Senate. It then goes to the president for his signature. If he doesn't like it, he can veto it. What will normally happen if he understands that he does not have the requisite votes to overturn a veto, then he will normally sign it. Okay, so a president will normally not veto a bill which will be overridden by Congress. Okay, and then, now the threshold is high there. To pass a bill, 51%. In terms of to override a veto, we need to have at least 2/3 of both chambers to override a veto. So that's how a bill becomes a law.
So if we don't have control of the Congress, we will not see reparations.
As the Congress is structured now, we have a very polarized Congress. It used to be a time when the Congress was more moderate, which is another way of saying that they were willing to compromise, both Democrats and Republicans. That is no longer the case, and it's been like that for over 30 years now. So we don't expect to see much compromise. Again, when you can imagine the majority leader in the Senate going on Fox News and telling that audience that whatever Obama favored, it would never see the light of day. Okay, from his appointees to the federal courts to any piece of legislation. They wanted to make Barack Obama a one-time president. That was their goal. One of their platform goals was to make Obama a one-term president. Of course, it did not work.
So did we actually put Obama into office, or did white people?
Well, if you look at 1,000 voters, okay, I'm talking about 1,000 voters, anywhere from 720 to 730 of those voters are white, 12 to 13 of them are black, 11 to 12, 120 to 130 of them are black. And that 130, that's on a good day when we really come out. And the Hispanics are somewhere around 110 to 120 voters. So if we were to add up both Hispanic voters and black voters, we're looking at anywhere from 23 to 24%. And when we look at white voters, we're looking at anywhere from 720 to 730 voters. So unless we get at least 30 or so percent of whites to vote with us, we cannot put a president in office. Okay, that's what most of us of that 120 people are going to vote for the Democrat. That's about 87% or so. So really that 120, even on a good day, let's say if we make the assumption that all 100% of those 120 or those 130 black voters and 100% of those 110 to 120 Hispanic voters, if we were to assume that all of them voted for the same candidate, we would still need a considerable number of white candidates, right, to vote with us in order for our candidate to win. Now, of course, we know that 100% of all of those blacks and 100% of Hispanics do not all vote for the same candidate. Okay, Hispanics, they're somewhere around 67% of them will vote for the Democratic candidate.
And we're around 87%.
Around 87% of us will vote for the Democrat.
And we still need whites to vote in order for our politics to win.
Well, if we look at it realistically, we're going to need about 37% of whites that vote to vote with us.
Okay, let me read some of the comments. They've been really busy. If you have comments or questions, please put them in the chat. If we don't get to it within the hour, I usually go through and respond or tag Marlon to respond. So please do not hesitate to put your questions or your comments. Let me back it up. I saw, let's see here. Okay, Jalib Arts is talking about, oh, he's an ADOS ally. Thank you so much. He mentioned CARICOM reparations. Okay, let me just kind of do this little sidebar thing. And if you want to just unpack it on a different show, we can, if you haven't had time to research it. But it appears that Sheila Jackson Lee, who holds the reparations, she's been left in charge of the reparations, the HR 40 from John Conyers, as you mentioned earlier. She is of Jamaican descent. I don't know if that's one or both parents, but she is talking of reducing. She was initially not for cash reparations. It appears now that she is going to reduce our demand of 17 trillion per Dr. William Sandy Darity's number down to 100 billion. And she wants to share that with Caribbean people in this country who pretty much came here after the 1965 Immigration Act. Jalib mentioned CARICOM reparations, which I fully am in support of Caribbean people that descend from slavery in the Caribbeans. They are owed the reparations there. But the challenge for many of us here is that we've got NARC and NCOBRA and Sheila Jackson Lee working together to actually share American descendant of chattel slavery reparations with all Blacks, I think even Africans. And as we know, some of the Africans in this country descend from Africans who sold us into slavery. What are your thoughts about Sheila Jackson Lee wanting to share our reparations with Blacks that descend from other places since the 1965 Immigration Act?
Well, again, these reparations studies have not been able to take hold. So part of the process in a bill becoming a law, right, there's an opportunity for public hearings. So there is an opportunity for ADOS groups to speak before these committees, to voice all of these concerns. There, of course, since it's a study, there's going to have to be determinations that are going to be made as to who is eligible. I know that Dr. Darity has put forth some eligibility requirements. So in terms of having that conversation right now, I think it's a moot point because the support is not there. I think the first thing we need to do is to garner the support, and then these types of deliberations can be made when there is an opportunity for public hearings. There are going to be experts that are going to be called upon. This isn't something that Congress people will do in isolation. Okay, so we just need to make sure that we are at the table when all of these deliberations are being made. So it's important for us to understand that. Okay.
And how do we ensure we're at the table? Would that be through our elected officials who understand our demands and our gate around our specific reparations in this country? How would that
work? Of course. There are 55, well, really in terms of the voting members, there are about 53 or so. Well, really less than that. If you look at the Republicans, they're not going to support it. Tim Scott's not going to support this. And Will Hurd, he's out the door. So then there are two delegates. They have a voice. We could make our demands heard. But in terms of a vote, they don't have a vote. So, so the ones that have a vote in those 26 states, if you live in one of those 26 states, then you need to make your voice heard. That is your representative. So if you live in Texas, right? Sheila Jackson Lee lives there. And if she's in your district, then of course you want to reach out to her. But there are any number of folks, at least in 26 or so states, if you're in one of those particular states, if you have a CBC member in your state, then of course you want your voice to be heard by those people. Of course, we need to find out who those 168 or so sponsors are. All of those sponsors, if you're paying attention to the numbers, they are not going to be Black. They will be of other races or ethnicities. We need to find out who those persons are. Your audience can go to congress.gov and look up HR 40, find out who those sponsors are, reach out to those sponsors and to make your concerns heard.
Sorry, I'm typing that. You said to go to congress.gov, look up HR 40. A lot of us are guppies in politics, so I have to share and give them the tools to fight for what they desire. Congress.gov, look up HR 40 and find the sponsors.
Yes. Yes. And actually, any legislation, any bill, any resolution, anything that Congress does, you could find it at that website. You can find out who the sponsors are, right? Who was the person that introduced it? You could find out what committee it's assigned to. You could find out the language, what a description of what it's for. And you can find out the actions that have been taken on that particular piece of legislation. So I would advise going to that website, looking up HR 40, finding out who the co-sponsors are. And if there is a co-sponsor that is in your particular congressional district, make contact with whomever that person is and to make your concerns heard. But of course, after 20 or more years, it's never made it to the floor for a vote. So there is some more work to do to garner support. And I think one of the things that you and I are doing is that we want to increase that number from 55 to about 109 or so. That would represent 25% of the House of Representatives. And at least in my mind, 25% is a pretty significant number. If we can get all of them to vote as a block, again, we already have 160 or so sponsors. So that's over the 55. And I don't assume that all 55 are in favor of a reparations bill. But my point is that there's over 100 or so sponsors are going to be non-CBC members. Okay, so I guess the first thing we need to do is to put pressure on all CBC members to co-sponsor that bill, right? And even to get non-CBC members to co-sponsor that bill. Okay, if you live if you have a representative that is non-Black, that lives in your congressional district, a congressional district that has a significant number of Black people in that district, then there is an opportunity to put pressure on that particular legislator to have them support legislation that you favor, given that there's a significant number of African Americans in that particular legislator's district.
Okay. Just a second, I'm typing. Hold on, family. Okay. Let me go back. Can you just, before I go to the next comments and questions, can you share why the study is important? Lots of ADOS are, and I've been guilty too, are saying, what do we need to study? Slavery happened. And we've got our lead economist, Dr. William Sandy Darity, who says that 17 trillion is what is owed over multi-generations. What's there to study? Could you explain why that process needs to happen before we can even go to the next step of getting this accomplished? That's the first step. Could you please explain why that's an important first step?
Well, it's an important step because I've previously stated that reparations is not well supported among the American public. Okay, so this is a study. HR 40 is billed as a study to develop a plan for reparations. Okay, a study to develop a plan. It's not for reparations. And again, the idea from our congressional leaders, who are the experts, who understand all of the rules, is that they must develop support. Now, again, we're getting closer. Under John Conyers, there was never as much support as there is now. Okay, so we have to keep putting the pressure on in the House of Representatives. We have less of a chance in the Senate, where a similar bill, a companion bill, has been put forth there, introduced by Senator Cory Booker. But the whole idea is to develop support for it. Okay, and we are in the greatest position that we have ever had or have ever been in order to do that. We have a gentleman out of South Carolina, Clyburn, I think, is the majority whip in the House. We need to put pressure on him. Now, from what I understand, I know that he doesn't support it.
No.
He doesn't support it, but the whip is the person responsible for developing the support. He is the person that helps to count the votes. Okay, so he is in effect an obstacle. When he is in the party leadership, the whip is, if I'm not mistaken, the majority whip is maybe the third or fourth most powerful person in the House of Representatives. So he's in the upper echelons of the leadership in the House of Representatives, where the Democrats are the majority. Okay, so yeah, I would agree that yes, he is an obstacle, having that much power, and does not support even a reparations study. Okay.
Yes. Now, if the PAC were in a financial position, we could primary him, correct?
Well, that's true. He's always subject to a challenge, but the incumbent pretty much wins re-election 90%, over 90% of the time. So he's well supported just by virtue of the fact that he's in the upper echelons of the leadership. And much of this has to do with seniority. We have quite a few members that are in that are chairs of committees, that are chairs of subcommittees. As a matter of fact, I have some numbers on that. Let's see. For instance, the CBC is engaged at the highest levels of Congress with members who serve in House leadership. Representative James Clyburn, I just mentioned him, serves as the majority whip in the House. Representative Hakeem Jeffries serves as chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. And Representative Barbara Lee serves as co-chair of the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee. So these are very significant committees. In addition, 5 CBC members serve as chairs on the full House committees, and 28 CBC members serve as chairs on House subcommittees. So what I call our first team is playing significant roles, especially during this time. Okay, there is significant legislation, okay, which accrues to us disproportionately because of our legislators, our Black legislators. So I think it is disingenuous for people to say that they are there and they are not doing anything, even when they're outnumbered, even when that there are many procedural rules that can thwart what it is that they do, when they are limited in their ability to provide leaderships by virtue of the fact that they are not in the topmost ranks of the leadership. And the Speaker of the House is the most powerful position in the House of Representatives. There is a majority leader in the House as well. There is a majority leader in the Senate. And so there are a number of leadership positions that are determined by the Democratic House Caucus. And Representative Hakeem Jeffries is the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. So that's a very powerful position. That assembly determines the who is nominated and elected to the leadership positions. They determine the rules and the discipline for the Democratic Party, and they determine who is assigned to the various committees as well. So our CBC is in position to help determine some of these things, but I think that we need to recognize that they are still outnumbered. Okay, and again, they only represent 26 states. That ought to tell you a lot right there. If they only represent 26 states, that means that there are 24 states in which we have no representation. And if there's no representation, then that means that those particular legislators do not have to cater to our interests. I think we said about 82 million Americans. Of course, we know that there are about 320 million Americans. So that's only about a quarter of the population that our representatives represent. So we need to play the numbers. I think a lot of us, we get emotional and we can cite the data, which you refer to as disparity politics. I call it disparity studies. And we're very versed in that, but disparity studies and politics, those are totally two different things. If you don't understand how politics is played, politics is power. If we don't understand that this is about who controls the resources, this is who controls government. If we don't understand that politics is power, then we are already behind the 8 ball. And of course, we know what happens to the 8 ball. The 8 ball gets sunk.
Katina Maria Knight says, so policy is the only way to get a Black agenda pushed? To focus on the Senate seats?
Well, I don't understand why people think that. I've heard that said a lot. I don't understand why Black people in particular, think that that these legislators have no agenda. I don't. What would be the whole purpose of forming a Congressional Black Caucus if they were not to put forth an agenda? That doesn't make any sense. We can go to their website. I don't know of course, that's something that you could do with an internet search. All of that information is there. Just look at the issues. If you're patient, you can do an advanced search at their website to find all of the legislation that they have put forth. Or you can go to the website, congress.gov. If you have a list of who the CBC members are, you can put their names in there, and you can get an idea as to what your representatives, what they have introduced in the Congress. Okay, this is both in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. They're also charged with inquiries too. These various committees can call federal officials, public officials. They can call corporate heads and so forth. They can call them before their committees for hearings. They can subpoena them to answer questions before Congress. And so our politicians are involved in inquiries as well in these particular committees. And as I've mentioned, we have a number of them that are serving on very powerful committees. And so in addition to having an historic number of legislators, Black legislators in Congress, because of many of the seniority of many of them have assumed the chair of very powerful positions in Congress. I know that Kamala Harris is on the Judiciary Committee. She's not the chair there, but that's a very powerful position. So I'm trying to think of the lady out of California. Maxine Waters is the chair of a very powerful committee as well. So they are in position to do some good things. And so it is our job, our charge, to make sure that we support them. I'll give you an example. Maxine Waters wanted to challenge Obama during his tenure on not having a Black jobs bill. Okay, as a matter of fact, the CBC members went on a tour and they were promoting jobs for Black folks. And they wanted to challenge Obama on this, but they didn't have the gumption to do it because Obama was beloved by the Black community. So they were asking for permission to challenge Obama. But of course, we know the history of that. Black folks were enthralled with the nation's first Black president, and a politician would dare not challenge a president who is beloved by the public. So much of that has to do with us. I mean, power to the people. We've heard that a lot. And so the people are the ultimate check on our politicians, and to the extent that we don't give consent to challenge our politicians is to the degree that we don't get what it is that we need to advance our communities.
Well, this is the last question we'll take because we're coming on the hour. America Reagan asked, how do we get the public to support? We need protesters to demand reparations just as loud as they demand people to know Black Lives Matter. You go first and I'll answer what I've been doing.
Well, I think we're on the right, well, let me say this. We have the right goals in mind, and that is to increase the number of representatives we have in the House of Representatives. We need to look at those 24 states and make a determination as to whether we can enlist someone who is a viable candidate in those areas and that support our goals and our agendas and try to get them elected to Congress. Okay, so we live in a country in which the majority rules. So we need to over leverage ourselves in the House of Representatives and in the Senate to the degree that we can do that. Now, the Senate is a harder animal to get because, like I say, Black folks are really, in terms population-wise, there's only we're mainly located in the large urban areas. Okay, and there are some states that we're just not well represented in. So in those particular states, whether it be a small state, say like Wyoming, they still have what, 2 senators? And so the smaller states are going to be over leveraged in the Senate in terms of their political power. If you, just to give you an example, if you would compare the political leverage of Wyoming to the political leverage of California, which has about 39 million people, okay? California by itself has 55 House seats, okay? 55 House seats. They have the largest number of representatives in the House of Representatives, okay? But in the Senate, again, they have 39 million people, but they only have 2 senators. So you're looking at a place like Wyoming, which I don't even think has 600,000 people there. They also have 2 senators. You see where I'm going with this? So Wyoming is over leveraged in the Senate. Okay, and the Senate is where we get most of our trouble. I have some numbers here. I wanted to make your audience aware that in the last 28 years, this is titled Republican versus Democratic Control of the Federal Government over the last 28 years. And this is starting with the 103rd Congress, which is when Bill Clinton was in office. Republicans have dominated the U.S. House of Representatives 20 out of 28 years. Let me say that again. That's 20 out of 28 years. They have dominated the House of Representatives 71% of the time. They've dominated the Senate 16 out of 28 years. That's 57% of the time. And they've dominated the White House 12 out of 28 years. That's 43%. And say the White House, we're talking about the executive branch or the presidency. Republicans have dominated the House and Senate concurrently. Now, the House and the Senate make up the Congress, right? And the Republicans have dominated the House and Senate concurrently for 11 years to the Democrats 4 years. That's a ratio of 11 to 4. And Republicans have dominated the House, Senate, and the presidency for 9 years to the Democrats 4 years. Okay, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that Republicans have dominated the federal government over the last 28 years, and even the state legislators and executive branches. We're looking at what's called a trifecta. The Republicans have a trifecta in 22 states. That means they control their whole legislative branch and the governorship. In 22 states, the Democrats only control trifectas in 14 states. Okay. Now, this in itself is historic because if you look at the founding of both parties, when they were founded in the 1800s, the Democrats have controlled the federal government. But over the last 28 to 30 years, the Republicans have dominated the state government and the federal government. Okay, the majority, that means that they set the rules. Okay, now because they are ideologically opposed to the Democratic Party on significant legislation, and by virtue of the fact that they have become polarized, both parties are guilty of this, they will not compromise with the other party on significant legislation, least it be appropriations. Now, the appropriations process is a totally different process. We're talking about how the money is determined. The House, that always starts with the House of Representatives, but of course the Senate must vote on that, but only the House of Representatives puts forth legislation on appropriations. Okay, and they have rules in place that allow them to get appropriations bills through both chambers more easily than some other type of bill. So it's important for us to understand that as well. Yes, they control the purse strings, the House of Representatives, but as you can see, the Republican Party, for the most part, has controlled the appropriations. Okay. And
yes. Okay. Go ahead. No, finish your thought.
They believe in small government. They want to reduce federal spending and thus federal programs. Okay, what people don't understand is that this is the same thing that the Confederacy attempted to do during the early part of the United States, is that they also wanted to reduce federal spending because, at least in their mind, that was federal overreach. And we know what the Republican Party was doing at that particular time. They were against the institution of slavery. And from the eyes of a Democrat, what would have been Democrats at that time, the South, after the Civil War up into the 1960s, were Democrats. Okay, and I don't think a lot of us know that. Is that that's why I said earlier, is that the Democrats have controlled the federal government since the majority of the time since the Reconstruction period, and it was only up until the 1960s where the southern states began to switch over to the Republican Party. And now most southern states, I think there are about 16 of them, if I'm not mistaken. Some of them are swing states, but the majority of them are solid red states. Florida, I think, is what you would call a swing state. Louisiana may be a swing state. Delaware may be Democratic. Virginia goes back and forth. That's another swing state as well. So it's important for us to understand that the gains that Republicans have made have been over the last 20 to 30 or so years.
Would that be different if we were to participate in the midterms?
In terms of the advantage that is gained by Republicans?
No, for example, when we had the trifecta, let's say during Obama, His first 2 years, we had a trifecta.
Yes.
Can we sustain that kind of trifecta if we turned up and out for the midterms? Not just us alone, but if the country showed up for the midterms and sustained our trifecta, could we change those numbers that you just cited about how much? Could we change the percentage of the states we control, and can we change how long the Democrats, how many years the Democrats could run the show if we showed up to the midterms to vote?
Well, I don't see why Democrats showing up at the polls during the midterms would be any less than the Republicans showing up at the midterms. I just think that there's a greater incentive for Republicans to show up during the midterms when the Republicans come in to win the Congress and the presidency. I think just by virtue of the fact of what the Democrats believe in, which is equality, and the fact that they have Black legislators and the fact that they have Black constituencies. See, we need to understand is that in a republic, you have constituencies. And if your constituency looks a particular way, then you have to serve the needs of that constituency. Okay. And right now, the Republican Party does not serve the needs of the Black constituency. They've been able to dominate government. And again, this goes back to the numbers. They've been able to dominate government over the last 30 years, and Black folks have not voted for them. So in other words, they don't need our votes. Okay. And by virtue of the fact that we only have 2 Black legislators, and we're about to be down to 1 at the end of the year when Will Hurd retires, is another indication that Black people do not trust the Republican Party. As a matter of fact, Will Hurd said it himself. He said that they have been assholes. Okay, in an article in Meet the Press, he said they have been assholes. They have basically saying that they have been racist, homophobic, and other things. And they did have 1 female Black Republican, Mia Love. But of course, she lost during her reelection campaign. She was from Utah. And I don't think there's many Black folks in Utah. So that means that we can win in these places, right? Mm-hmm. But she did not win reelection. And much of that has to do with white folks, at least in my mind, will rally when they see that we may gain some kind of advantage. See, they understand politics is power. And so when they see the numbers not in their favor, this is when they truly come out in the midterms to reestablish the majority in either the House, the Senate, or both.
But we failed to show up during the midterms. We don't. So you're saying that it doesn't matter whether we show up or not during the midterms?
Well, I'm not. I haven't looked at the numbers during the. My hunch is that it ebbs and flows because you understand that when Trump came into office, he had a trifecta. He had the Congress, both House and the Senate. And of course, he was the president. They had this for 2 years. And then in the midterms, the Democrats were able to retake control or take control of the House of Representatives. So from that standpoint, it appears that the party that is out of power understands that it needs to get back in power. And of course, the incentive is there to get people out to vote. And that's what they do, is that they're going to do what they have to do to get back in power. Because if you aren't the majority, you cannot control the government.
Okay. Thank you for that. Lisa Todd, Vice President, ADOS Columbus. Welcome to the live, my dear. She says the Republicans let the Dems run the cities while they control the policies at the state and federal levels. Did you want to speak to that or concur?
It just all depends on where you live at. In the large urban areas, that may be true, but in the large urban areas, you normally have many minorities. Okay, so of course that would be true, given that minorities, for the most part, vote for the Democratic Party.
Okay. Can you share a little bit about what Biden has done towards our civil rights? What bills has he supported? Do you know? Were you able to pull
I have
that?
information on that. Of course, he's been in Congress going on 40 years or so, and he has a 100% rating by the NAACP, indicating a pro-affirmative action stance. He has a 60% rating by the American Civil Liberties Union, indicating a mixed civil rights voting record. In 1978, he opposed busing except for government-intended segregation. Let me expand on that one a little bit. People have been saying that he opposed busing. That was not the case. He actually opposed busing by the states. He said that if we were to do such a thing, it should be something that is done by the federal government. It should be imposed by the federal government. At the time, they wanted to leave it up. The Congress wanted to leave this up, or at least you had a faction in the Congress that wanted to leave this up to the states. Of course, that sounds like states' rights. And for those of us that know our history, we know that that is a dog whistle. When we hear states' rights, when we hear things like state block grants, when we hear reducing the federal spending and things in social programs for Black people, we should have raised eyebrows, because these are things that have historically been done to try to make sure that Black people do not gain any type of advantage instituted by the federal government. Biden also rejected a gentleman for the Supreme Court nominee by the name of Richard Bork. Now, this was a time I was a young adult in the 80s, and I still remember much of this. And I remember Richard Bork. The reports were is that he was a very racist individual, and Biden said that he would roll back civil rights. So of course, he did not vote for the nomination of Richard Bork to the Supreme Court. He voted yes on setting aside 10% of highway funds for minorities and women. He voted no on ending special funding for minority and women-owned businesses. He voted no on banning affirmative action hiring with federal funds, okay? And he co-sponsored issuing a commemorative postage stamp for Rosa Parks. There's some other things here, but at least from my standpoint, I would choose Joe Biden, who was a senator, which means that he had to vote along with 99 other people, right? He at least had to achieve a majority there. 51, at least 50 other people had to vote along with him in order for the legislation that he favored to pass. And I think that's one of the things that we sort of miss, is that these politicians are normally voting for things that their constituents support. They're not there as an island by and of themselves, and if they are, they normally don't stay there that long. Okay, a lot of us mentioned the crime bill, but many of us fail to realize is that the Republicans were in control of the House and the Senate in 1994. People will mention Joe Biden, but they never remark about Orrin Hatch, who was also a co-sponsor of that bill, and he was a Republican. Okay. Again, remember the majority party determines who chairs each committee. They also determine the agenda for each house. In other words, they determine what legislation is to be voted on in their respective chambers. And the Republicans control both the House and the Senate at that particular time. Of course, Bill Clinton was president. And if you can imagine being president, you want to make sure to establish your legacy. So one of the things that they will do as a show of compromise, especially when they know they don't have that their legislation may be overwritten, is that they'll go ahead and vote for legislation and then take credit for it. Okay, so Bill Clinton was the one who was able to take credit for that 1994 crime bill because the president is the one who takes credit. Okay.
Okay. Well, I thank you so much for your time today. We're definitely over by about 20 minutes, but I appreciate you coming on to this episode of Real Clear ADOS Politics. I thank you, audience, for your participation. I really hope that you'll join us next Saturday for another episode. I'm going to just be running this series until we understand. It's just a series that's very much needed amongst ADOS. We have got to understand how politics really work so that we can strategize and get out of our emotions and come up with a solid solution to get the reparations that we are long overdue. And we also have to accept that the reparations may not happen this lifetime, but we've got to set the stage for it to happen for our children and their children. We may, the biggest accomplishment of this whole effort may be just to get the Congress we need to make this happen. I don't know what it'll look like. I know we're going to be pushing for reparations like a silent drumbeat, but none of this happens until we fully understand how politics truly works. And that is what this series is designed to do, to really help us to understand beyond the despair in our communities how this works so we can be effective. I want you to visit friendsofados.com and let's begin to aggregate our dollars so that we missed a big window this time around. We had Tamara Johnson Shealy running for Congress out of Atlanta, out of Georgia. She's still running, and you should support her in every way that you can. But we were slowed down when we were divided on the belief that whether or not we need a PAC. Yvette did not want a PAC for her movement, which was the movement we all kind of started after being told to go be the solution. And Marlon and I and our board have chosen to continue with the PAC because we believe that we're going to forever be on the menu if we can't pay to be at the table and primary some of these seats, or at least be able to be influential through the candidates, through the elected officials that we currently have, to impress upon them the importance of supporting and sponsoring reparations. So please visit friendsofados.com, donate, share about the PAC with everyone you know. It seems like every discussion, all the YouTube videos that I've been watching of late, we need a PAC. We need a PAC. Everybody's talking about PAC. And many folks don't even know that we've already established one. Friends of ADOS PAC. Visit us at friendsofados.com. Also, if you could please subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's where I archive many of these videos that I shoot live here in the Facebook space. Share those links. Share this link. Make it go viral. And until next time, family, I love you Black. I love you strong. I want you to make it a beautiful, God-inspired rest of your Saturday. And you know I have to put my prayer protection amongst each of you. Happy Juneteenth, family. I forgot to mention that. I will be doing a show tomorrow in the Zoom space. So we'll post that link with ADOS SoCal. We're doing our Juneteenth celebration, talking about ADOS, the movement down here, and what you can do to get involved. I do hope you tune in for that. But I do need to say our prayer protection, especially with all the drama and the trauma happening in these streets. I want you to take care of yourselves, family. Be sure to decompress. This news is very dark. It's very heavy. I want you to establish some way to de-stress and decompress. I had an amazing time yesterday in Leimert Park. I also went with one of my very dear sister friends, Jamie Burton, or friend to ADOS. She is ADOS. She's been on the show. We went to a Black-owned skate shop to get our customized skates because we want to, skate up and down the boardwalks here on the beaches of Southern California. And then I went to Lunel, the Hollywood over there on Sunset. They did a huge Juneteenth event, and it was just beautiful to see people from all walks of life out there in full celebration up in Hollywood. I appreciated each and every one of them. And back to one of my earlier points before I pray us out, someone asked, how do we reach the masses? I was able to get my Friends of ADOS PAC card in the hands of majority whites who were out there screaming for Black Lives Matter. And they are at the place where they are listening now, very interested in getting involved. And I say we have to make friends across the aisle from all backgrounds. We need allies. As Marlon said with the numbers, we aren't going to pull this off by ourselves. So go out and lovingly educate people from other walks of life to help them understand, because they really don't know, because the history is not being taught. So as the ADOS movement, this is where everybody can pick up a brick and just bridge that divide. Given the recent executions of Black men and women, we have a lot of white people who are open-hearted and want to give, and they are giving. We just have to continue to let them know that we are here and would appreciate those gifts. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever ADOS and its allies are, God truly is, because, family, you are the face of God. You are the voice of God. You are the body temple of the Spirit of the living God. Take care, family. Mwah. Thank you.